guys so much for attending today's webinar, Modernize and Streamline Your Agency's Budget Process with Workiva. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items just about the engagement tool. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a window for Q&A. Feel free to submit any questions throughout the webinar. We'll be able to see them, and we'll be sure to save time at the end of the webinar to address these at the end of the demonstration. Up here in the right-hand corner, you can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking in the window in the top right-hand corner, but we'll be sure when we're sharing to expand those for you all. And I will go ahead and get started. So hopefully y'all can see the slides full screen here. And just by way of a quick introduction, my name is Kat Baumstark. I am a regional sales director here on the federal team at Workiva. I support a bit of our civilian and defense agencies at Workiva. And with me today is Jim Barreto, who will be running through our demonstration of the platform. So Jim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Kat. Hi, everyone. My name is Jim Barreto, and I'm a public sector solutions engineer at Workiva. And my role today will be to do a quick walkthrough of the platform and demonstrate how it could potentially modernize your organization's budget process. A bit of background about myself. Prior to Workiva, I actually worked for the federal government as a financial analyst for the Navy, and before that spent the majority of my career in various financial advisory roles, supporting both DoD and civilian agencies in all areas of financial management. So happy to be with you today.
Thanks, Jim. And just by way of a quick agenda, kind of a layout of our discussion today, we'll start with a quick background about Workiva and kind of how we're playing in the federal space to give some context for those who might not be familiar. I'll pass it over to Jim after that to kind of introduce the platform and talk about the current state we see with a lot of our customers and their environments today and kind of how your process would look with Workiva. We'll then move into the demonstration, and as I mentioned, we will save time at the latter end of the webinar for Q&A. So just a quick overview about Workiva. We really got our start in 2008, think SEC reporting, SOX reporting on the commercial side, but we've really grown and expanded since then. And then in the last 2 to 3 years have really grown our federal presence as well. The Workiva platform has about 200 use cases or solutions on the commercial side, and we've developed our own suite of solutions or use cases on the federal side as well, which I'll touch on here in the next slide. Just a couple quick facts here on the slide. You see that 95% customer satisfaction and retention rate. Once Jim gets into the platform, he can really demonstrate how intuitive it is and why that number is what it is. You can see at the bottom there a couple of our certifications. We are FedRAMP Moderate certified, SOC 1, SOC 2 there as well. You can see up here our state and local presence, but we have about 10 federal agencies today currently leveraging Wdesk for a myriad of financial reporting and compliance needs. As I mentioned, we are a platform, and that's really why we like to show this slide to really hammer that home. You can see across the top there's individual use cases or solutions, but we really like to reiterate that this is a platform and agencies are able to share and collaborate across these different use cases. So I'll walk through those. Obviously today we're going to be focused on that congressional budget justification that's included in our financial reporting suite, which is in the top left there. So anything from your agency financial report, performance management, and that APR, and then today's focus, congressional budget justification. But just to touch on the other solutions within the platform, we have our integrated risk suite, which is that second one there, that A123 process, joining that with ERM and internal controls over reporting, and then that audit management and policy management as well. All of the icons that you see below those use cases are just ways that we can bring these solutions to light within the platform. So Jim will demonstrate a bunch of these capabilities that you see here, namely our dynamic linking technology and really having that collaboration with control, full audit trail. But as I mentioned, while we are focused on CJ today, keep in mind that this is a flexible and intuitive platform where we can share data across and work across these use cases within an organization. And then last slide, by way of kind of a background about Workiva, as I mentioned, we are FedRAMP Moderate. So as we started to go after the federal space, that was obviously very important for us to achieve that certification and be able to work with many federal customers such as yourself. We have a proven fast implementation success as well, and an amazing support team with our dedicated US-based customer success managers. These are folks that are assigned specifically to each account, really get to know your process, your team. So anything from troubleshooting, onboarding a new team member, or just general questions, that person really becomes that extension of your team as well. As I mentioned, we are 100% cloud-based. We've been born and raised in the cloud. We also work with a large partner community to kind of help our customers succeed. So any contract support that you have in-house, any contractors or folks that you work with, they're certainly included in your platform, and we're sure to help them understand how to implement and support you throughout the life of the contract as well. And the last thing I'll mention, a tidbit here, we invest a large portion of our annual revenue back into research and development. So as it is a cloud-based platform, you'll be seeing updates in the platform weekly, if not daily. And you can also have that confidence that you're always working in the most up-to-date version of the platform. So I will pass it over to Jim for this next slide, but that's just a high-level overview about Workiva.
Thanks, Kat. So before I jump into the actual demonstration of the platform, a couple quick slides to frame what you'll be seeing today and provide some context really for what the platform is able to do as far as your reporting process. So the slide that you see now is the typical reporting process that we see in organizations' environments before they come onto the Workiva platform. So it really starts at the beginning on the left-hand side there with the data. The data that's needed to produce any end report, whether that's the CBJ, any budget execution reports, AFR, whatever it may be. We see that data is typically coming from both systems such as Oracle or SAP, and even various templates or files that may be native to someone's local drive. And what happens is that those data sources are being aggregated or combined into some sort of master working file that's then split up and distributed to all the stakeholder teams that are contributing to the development of that particular report. And once that happens, we see a lot of issues surrounding version control and potentially even some issues around a check-in, check-out process with SharePoint. And that's just, there's a cumulative effect where when that happens, there's just a lot of potential room for data inconsistencies and even, folks working off the wrong versions because it hasn't been posted to the right SharePoint site. And so a lot of inefficiencies, not much room for collaboration. And then at the end of it all, someone has the fun job of going back in and putting all the pieces back together for either some sort of leadership review or publication to the appropriate location for consumption. And if there are any changes happening, in that system, then that just enters that whole process again of manual updates, and it calls into question the reliability of what may be reported for that particular report. And so the next slide is what we typically see after an organization comes onto the Workiva platform. And as you can see there on the left-hand side, all the data sources are still intact. And that's because Workiva is not trying to replace your underlying systems. Rather, we are trying to introduce a system of work to modernize your reporting process. And the way we do that is through this two layers of the application. The first being that connected data staging environment that you see there. And there are a few ways we can bring your data into that data staging environment. So there's disparate sources, whether structured data coming from ERP systems or even unstructured data coming from Excel files or templates that may be used today to collect information. We bring that into the data staging environment. We can connect directly to underlying core systems because we are a system agnostic platform. I think currently we have about 60 direct connectors, and that list is expanding regularly. We can take direct uploads of flat files as outputs from those systems, and we can even connect to an SFTP site if that's a consideration for security purposes. But once the data is in the data staging environment, it can then be pushed out to the reporting application, the reporting layer, the platform, which is in that green box there at the top. And we have three different report types within the platform. There's a cell-based editor, which is the green circle there. It looks and feels a lot like Microsoft Excel. There's a document editor, which is the blue circle, looks and feels like Word, and then a presentations editor, which looks and feels like PowerPoint. And this was done purposely by Workiva to minimize the learning curve for our customers as they as they onboard into the platform. And what we see is, typically higher adoption rates, as Kat mentioned, a high retention rate as well, because the platform is so intuitive and the interface is so familiar already. But the way our reporting differs from those legacy tools that you might be using today is we offer full collaboration with granular access control across all those report types, a robust audit trail for review purposes, and lastly, a proprietary linking technology that really holds all those reports together, meaning if there are any changes occurring, say in a summary schedule or a financial statement in the cell-based environment, we can push out those changes automatically to all the appropriate destinations in the end reports, whether in a document or a presentation for management reporting purposes, thus ensuring the consistency of the data from the end report all the way back to the underlying system of record. So before I jump into the platform, what you can expect for a scenario today is we'll be walking through, typical manual process of collecting, budget requests and how we can automate the collection of that data and ultimately aggregate it within the platform and combine it with actuals data and also historical budgetary information to then start creating those various reports, for your budget reporting needs. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and let's jump into the platform. Give me 1 second here. All right. So this is the landing page for the Workiva platform. And as Kat mentioned, because we are 100% cloud-based and have been since day one, all you would need to get to the platform is internet access and a modern web browser. So once a user logs in, this is what they typically see in their dashboard. They see all the recent files they've been working on, any important files that they've starred for quick access, any tasks that have been assigned to them, and any places they've been mentioned in the various files within the platform. So let's go ahead and jump into the cell-based environment. And what you'll see today, all the files that we'll be walking through, this is all created within the platform. These weren't created offline and brought in. Rather, all the work that was done to create these were done in the platform. And so this is just an example, for demonstration purposes. This is the FY 2020 Congressional Budget Justification Master. And what you see is that this spreadsheet environment looks and feels a lot like Excel. And even here at the top, similar ribbon, commands and functionalities that you're probably used to working with today. These cells, you can write into them, you can pull up formulas, a lot of the same formulas with Excel. And so what you're able to do is create any sort of collection template or a summary schedule that you need for reporting, using this cell-based editor. So what we're looking here is just an example of a budget request template that could be sent out by a budget office to program offices as they're putting their budgets together. One thing to note, though, one difference that I wanted to point out between our cell-based editor and that Excel environment is on the left-hand side. This is what's called the navigation outline. So in Excel, you're probably used to working in the in an environment where there are tabs at the bottom. You can toggle back and forth. But here, instead of having those tabs, we have what's called sections in this outline. And so this is the first step towards that full collaboration with control that I mentioned. And so the way this would work, using this example, say this were a budget request template that was being sent out by a budget office, like a centralized budget office in an agency, to various program offices. They could create different sections for each program office and have those appropriately permissioned out to the right analyst in those offices. So what would happen is, sticking with this example of the accounting and reporting, say Sally Jane was the analyst in that particular program office. They were coming to the platform, and what they would see is that they would only have access to their particular section, and they would be restricted from seeing the information in any other section. So this is the way that we are able to, again, control that sort of collaboration, because this is one file where the entire collection process can be managed. And so within this template, walking here, starting from the left-hand side, what Sally would see is that all the line items have been put together for her, historical information, from prior years have been put in, and we can actually lock this information down so it can't be altered. And really only places where she can make any changes in this request template would be in the blue areas. And so she could have her various budget scenarios, whether cuts and gains, to see what the impact would be, to the budget, and ultimately put any adjustments she may have for ultimately having the proposed budget request. And within this template, she can also add any commentary to provide context for what she's requesting, as well as any attachments to support those requests. And so she could attach PDF, Excel files, whatever it may be. It can all live and breathe here in the platform. So as the budget office, I think the typical way it's being done now, from what we see, is that there are multiple files that are going out to the various program offices. But again, because we have the ability to promote collaboration across all teams, the budget office could really just do all the work in this one file, permission out those sections accordingly to the right program offices, and grant them the right access and restrict it in the other areas. And so once that information has been put together by the analyst and submitted, what we can do now, what that office can do now, is then collect all that information and automate the process to aggregate it with all the other historical information and start creating those end reports, those summary schedules to monitor outlays, to track budgets to actuals, things that would be needed for compliance purposes and even internal management purposes. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into that data staging environment that I mentioned up top, really the first part of the platform. And this is called WData Chains. And this is the way that we would actually connect to those underlying core systems. And this is the way we also automate processes within the platform. So just to orient you to what you'll see before I run this chain, what's going to happen is that this chain will basically take that template that Sally filled out. It would then run through a series of steps to clean the data before ultimately updating the existing data within the platform, running a query to then aggregate it and produce some sort of consumable output, like a flat file, before ultimately updating that master spreadsheet. So let's go ahead and run the chain and see what happens. So we like to explain this by basically saying a lot of the clicks and manual steps that you may do today for a particular process, could be done through chains and represented by these various commands. So it would be a huge time saver in addition to a repeatable process. And any sort of chain that you create within the platform to automate a process can be run on demand or even scheduled, whether daily, overnight, weekly, whatever the cadence may be for your reporting needs, so that you would wake up next morning if you need to the right data, to the most recent data. So before this finishes, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the spreadsheet and walk you through what you can expect to see. So I'm jumping to a different section within this budget master spreadsheet. It's called Budget Data Unstructured. And what you'll see is that it's going to roll forward the most recent accounting period or year-end period for this budget information is 19, but it's actually going to...
Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
Jim, you might have to reshare your screen. It paused there for a second. I don't know if that's just my view.
Okay.
It's reloading now.
Okay. So what just happened now is that that 19 information in this particular section has updated to 9/30/2020. It's collected all that information from the various program offices and dumped it into this, and now it's ready to be shared across teams for reporting purposes. And so let's go ahead and jump into an example, summary schedule that's using this information. I'm going to jump down here to this section for accounting and reporting. What you'll see is that there are different flags, these little flags at the left-hand top. Basically what that means is that a lot of the values that are on this particular schedule are actually being pushed out to various reports. And we'll show you what that looks like in just a second. But I mentioned that this, by running that chain, it updated that budget data unstructured section. But by virtue of that, it also updated this particular schedule because, as I mentioned earlier, these templates, you can develop them using formulas, and that's what's being done here. So I can tell you that, or I could prove it to you by drilling down to the specific history of this cell. So real quick, this is part of that audit trail feature that I mentioned up top. For this here, you can see that today at 1:20 p.m. Eastern Time, the value changed to 2020 budget for this cell. And so bringing it up a notch, sticking on that audit trail feature, one thing that the platform does is that over the course of time, since once a document or report is created, the platform automatically saves it every few minutes as users are in there actively making changes. And so you have a running history of all the revisions over time since this was created. You have the ability to pull up any sort of revision if you wanted to see it at a particular point in time. But really, the best way to use this feature is what we call our black lines feature, which allows you to compare any two revisions over time to see what changes have been made. We find that our customers find this to be very useful as they are going and seeing what changes have occurred from one reporting period to another or from one draft to the current draft. So I'll go ahead and pull up an example of that black line to show you what it looks like. So similar to how track changes works in Microsoft Word, any new data that's in the more current revision would show up in blue, and any old data from the prior revision that's being compared would show up in red and scratched out. So you can see exactly what's changed and see what that old value used to be. So I'm going to jump back to the spreadsheet. You'll see that these triangles are both blue and red, and if I hover over them, it's saying that it's unpublished, meaning that those end reports that these are going to have not been updated yet. This is just another way we introduce some control in the process, because as you're creating these schedules or tables or financial statements, whatever it might be, sometimes you need one last step to review numbers before publishing it for consumption. So looking here at this particular line, because this is a summary schedule showing comparing budget to actuals, for fiscal year 2020, I see that for this particular line item, I've actually spent more than double what I originally budgeted for. So part of that audit trail feature is that within the platform, to promote that collaboration and to streamline the review process, we have what's called direct commenting. To show you how that works, I'm going to come here and direct a comment to one of my colleagues to ask them to look into this. And what will happen once I post this are two things. My colleague, Zach, will get an email notification in his inbox directing him, or rather notifying him that he has a comment in this specific report, and will provide a hyperlink for him to come here and review the comment and do his analysis, and ultimately he provide the feedback as needed. And the other thing is that a comment will actually post here within the platform. And the way that these comments work within the platform is that they can be saved down over time, and you as the end user, the owner, can manage it accordingly. You can resolve them, close them out, delete them, move them. It all lives within the platform and could be referenced as needed over time. And so, Zach's looking into this now, but let's say, for instance, that Zach responded and he provided me with an explanation as to why this number is what it is. I'll add it here in this commentary column just for reference purposes. And I'll show you that we have the ability to link narrative, or rather values, as well as narrative. And this is why I'm putting this in here. So now we have an explanation for this particular number. I'm ready to publish this to that end report, for management purposes. So in this example, this is some sort of outlay monitoring report or spend plan report. A lot of times what we're seeing now is that management or leadership wants to see things in a more concise way, say in that dashboard format. And so I'm going to split screen and pull up a presentation as an example dashboard. You can see here that everything is still as of 9/30/19. There's tables here that reflect that, and there's even underlying data behind this chart that reflects that. Once I hit publish here in the spreadsheet environment, you'll see that all those values that have been linked will change. Let's go ahead and do that. So you see there, the bar chart updated, the pie chart, and even that commentary I put in this text box to provide context for some of this information is updated. So really, it does showing the power of the platform, and that once you have the data within the platform, you have the ability to create whatever sort of report you need, and then ultimately push it out to the other reports that may be used, for management purposes. And because we are talking about CBJ, also in that end report as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop this split screen and focus on this presentation for a moment. I wanted to point out, I'm going to jump onto this specific link here for total expenditures for FY 2020 request. Open up our linking properties to show you that indeed this is a destination link that points back to that spreadsheet that we were just in. But because the way the platform works, we can also see the other destinations that this particular value occurs. And so, whereas now for your budget process, you may be navigating your SharePoint sites or share drives, you're doing your control finds for specific documents or reports to find a value. Once you have values linked within the platform, you have the ability to just go back to that original source link, or even to see where else in your reporting ecosystem something has been reported. So I'll go ahead and jump to a different destination here. You can see that we're in this presentation, but this value occurs in the CBJ, even in a budget in brief. Let's go ahead and jump to the CBJ to pull up that document editor environment. So as you can see here in this table, that value also occurs here and it's linked out. So this is a document editor. Looks and feels like a lot like Word. All the features and functionalities we just walked through, as far as collaboration with granular access control, audit trail, all applies here, and linking as well, as you can see. So one last thing I want to show you as far as linking. A lot of times these values, these reports rather are not static. If OMB A11 requirements changes, you may have new requirements to report these values. So to create a new link within the platform, it's just a simple copy and paste. So what I'll show you is that the number of destinations for this, once I create a new link, will change from 8 to 9. And so let's see what happens when I do that. So I'll copy, I'll just come over here, and I'll simply paste. You can see there that green underline occurs and the number changed from 8 to 9 as far as destinations. And we also have the ability within the platform to render different values as needed. So if I wanted to show this in a different way, say words or whatever it might be, we have the ability to do that. Fully confident that this ultimately goes back to that original source link where the value is coming from. So that wraps up the demonstration of the platform. I know we covered a lot of ground, but let's just kind of recap what we walked through. And I'll do that by jumping back to that slide I was in before. So I will stop sharing my screen and go back to the slides for a second. So what we just walked through is that we brought in data, or rather the scenario walkthrough already had historical data in there, budgetary information from prior years, but we had a collection process that we used the cell-based editor to use to collect manually, or what you may be doing manually now. We showed how we can automate the process to collect that and ultimately aggregate it with other historical information to then create the kinds of reports that we need for budget purposes. And once we have the data in the platform, the creation of those reports is as easy as just pushing a few buttons to update the links and get the changes that you need for the reporting period. You can be fully confident that, again, the information that's being reported could be traced back to that particular system of record or that data source, thus ensuring the accuracy and consistency of that data. So one last thing, we get a lot of questions out of these demonstrations about, customers, organizations usually like what they see, but they have questions about implementation, if they would have to create things from scratch, if they were to come on board. And the short answer to that is not at all. We have services teams of solutions architects that could come in during your onboarding reporting implementation process and help you get your reports set up and help you create those links as needed so that you would not be starting from scratch day one. And so we touched on some of the high-level features of the platform and how it could modernize your budget process. Normally what we like to do next is just really spend some time to understand your specific process and how we can then tailor the platform demonstration to show you how it could fit within Workiva. So with that said, I will turn it back over to Kat to close out to see if we have any Q&A.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks so much for the awesome demonstration. I don't see any